So, once again, it's a true pleasure to see you, John. And I would like to start this conversation by asking you, how did you start? I mean, as in, why the guitar? How did that came about?
That was really random, Francesco, because I didn't come from a musical family. Nobody in my family played or liked jazz. I didn't play jazz for the first 10 years of my musical life. So a friend who I'm still in touch with, she's now in her late 80s, wonderful lady who was my babysitter, put a ukulele in my lap when I was about 9 or 10 years old and just showed me a few simple chords. And then I think my parents bought me an acoustic guitar first. And then maybe when I was in my mid to late teens, I started playing electric guitar in little rock bands in Connecticut, where I grew up in the Northeast, not too far from New York City. And gradually getting a little better in rock bands. And then someone introduced me to jazz just as a listener, maybe when I was 18 or 19. I wasn't really playing it. And then a lot of musicians my age, I think I pulled into jazz from some of the earliest fusion jazz if we were playing rock music before. So things like Weather Report, Bitches Brew, Chick Corea, all the important jazz fusion groups of the late 60s, early 70s pulled a lot of us who were rock musicians into jazz. So we started by maybe playing long vamps and just trying to figure out how to add some of the harmony, and then gradually went into learning, understanding really the harmonic structures of standards, and then going back and checking out earlier jazz. But fusion was my introduction to jazz. So for someone who tried to become a professional musician, I got a late start. Because some people are playing jazz very well when they're 17 or 18. I didn't even start, probably 21 or 22. And I had good teachers in Connecticut, then Link Chamberlain, who was a guitarist, who had a very active career teaching, wonderful guy and a great teacher, and a piano player named John Mahegan, who wrote some of the earliest books on jazz theory. He'd been in New York and moved out to Connecticut. So I had a chance to play a little bit with both of them and take some lessons with both of them. So, I really began serious study as a jazz musician probably when I was 21 or 22, pretty late.
Right, like you're well known for having a so-called pianistic style on the guitar, right? Although, as I mentioned to you before, to me, like, that's just how you play the guitar. Now, if you want to call it the pianistic style, great. Did John Meegan had an effect on you from that point of view?
That's a good question. Well, I was playing with him. He had a little weekend gig at a small restaurant in Connecticut, and I ended up doing that with him for a couple of years, just because I think it was helpful for him to have another soloist. He knew I was just really kind of beginning, but I was smart enough to stay out of his way and play softly enough and find something. He would just sometimes start playing a standard and not even tell me what the song was, and I would figure out something to play. I'm sure if I heard it now, I'd be kind of appalled, but it was good enough that he let me keep coming back, so I gradually got better. So, I was exposed to good jazz piano chords then, although I didn't really start thinking in those terms on the guitar until later when I started playing little solo gigs. And then listening to some of the guitarists who really have that kind of a style developed, like Lenny Breau or Jimmy Weibel or Ted Green. And I picked up a little bit from all of those sources and then trying to find my own vocabulary with chords. But I just like some of the sounds that you would hear on the piano on the guitar. So that involves open strings, stretching your hand a little bit to accommodate the wider intervals and so forth. I'm not the only one doing this, obviously, but it's a sound that I really like, especially in the more intimate solo and duo settings.
Well, you developed, that particular approach quite extensively. There is like only a bunch of guitar players that I know who are fluent, both melodically but also harmonically, and I'm talking technically, literally chords, as in close voicings and of course rhythmically. And of course you mentioned Ted Green, obviously.
Incredible.
Jimmy Weibel, I know he had an effect on you, although less known, let's put it that way, less known, at least to me. I discovered him only actually recently. There is no, I was trying to find things on YouTube about it, but there is it was very hard to find something, There
are a few, but he was a very unassuming, gentle, humble man, but an incredible guitarist. I mean, he could read anything. He could play beautiful jazz solos. He had these beautiful counterpoint etudes he developed with double stops and moving voicings. So I met him through Sid Jacobs, who's about my age, who studied with Jimmy. And he was in good health when I met him. He was playing well almost into his late 80s. He was still playing well when he was 85 years old. He was a sweet, gentle man who was very interested in what you were doing. So I went to his house a number of times and watched him do these etudes, and we played a little bit together, but most of that was watching him. And the thing that I took away from him immediately is all these beautiful moving double stops.
Yeah.
So that's tried to incorporate into my playing right away that I encourage other people to do also. Breaking chords down into smaller dyads, simpler shell voicings. You can move things around in ways that you can't do if you're trying to move a whole chord. So I've incorporated some of that into my playing too.
So kind of implying the harmony, but since we only have 6 strings, kind of economize,
Exactly.
in fact, which leads me, by the way, we're both improvisers, so these conversations might, take different directions, it's not necessarily, I didn't plan it. I mean, I have things that I noted down, but, solo guitar, I mean, it's like, again, there's a few people that I know that can go on a stage night after night, like you do, and play solo guitar, which I think is probably one of the most challenging things, at least for jazz player or let's say rock players, because classical guitar players, they're used to that. That's what they study in the repertoire. But in jazz, again, I can think of Joe Pass, Martin Taylor, you, of course. What are the challenges? So having a 1-hour show.
Yeah, it is challenging.
What are the challenges? I mean, how do you overcome that?
Part of it is creating an atmosphere where we're pulling the people in with a fairly limited dynamic palette. I mean, one man with a guitar, we have much less dynamic range than a piano, for example.
Yeah.
It's a pretty small dynamic range that we have. So some of it is just programming things with enough variety to keep people engaged. That's part of it. Part of it is sort of making decisions about what a particular audience is able to respond to and hear. So, when I play alone, it's not really high energy, fast tempos for the most part. When I play alone, it's much more introspective. Sometimes it's really just rubato playing. I won't do a whole evening of that. I'll play some things in time, but it's mostly medium to slower tempos, some bossa novas, some original songs. So I hope there's enough variety in the material to engage an audience because, the vibe is a little bit similar from tune to tune. I try to give it enough variety and play a few sort of semi-energetic things so that it doesn't put everybody to sleep. But it is a challenge. Part of it is also integrating all the different elements that I can use on the guitar into something that feels like it's working. And it doesn't work every night. Some nights I listen and I think this could be better. Other nights it feels like it's working pretty well. But I'm still refining it after doing this for 40 years, Francesco.
Right. Okay,
I still have lots of things that I'd like to do better, which is part of our little journey as students, and I embrace that. It's fine.
Well, plus I would think of course there is a technical challenge, the one you just described, but also like when you're playing duo or trio, somehow mentally you can rest at times. Maybe somebody else is taking a solo, and you can kind of regroup a little bit. Yeah. While it's solo guitar is incredibly exposed for, the amount of concentration required is something that I can personally I cannot do it. I can play solo guitar, but I could not do a show. Let's put it that way. It's as you say, it took you 40 years, and you're still learning it in a way. Oh, yeah.
The other thing I might suggest to you to help you feel a little more confident doing a whole show, just play for a few friends sometime at your house for an hour.
True.
Build up confidence that way. Yourself in an environment very low pressure, but still people are listening.
That's a brilliant idea. Actually, I never thought of that. And for those that don't know, I mean, your career, which is amazing from my perspective. I mean, it started as far as I know, late 70s or mid-late 70s, right? I'm saying professionally because you released your first, your Golden Delicious album, and I think that's 1977. That's and right. Then 78, you did the album with David Friesen, Through the Looking Glass, Through the Listening Glass, which actually I suggest people that are going to watch this interview to listen to that album because it's quite a statement. What's interesting to me is, you've been a guitarist now, you've gone through many generations of trends. I mean, you stay pretty much true to yourself all throughout, but you've seen all the changes happening. The late 70s, then the 80s, then the fusion period. How did you live these transitions? Did it change your way of approaching the guitar, or you just followed through it?
Interesting. I think, my sound changed over the years, and this is true of some other guys of my generation too. A lot of us experimented with guitar synthesizers and chorusing and delay and distortion. I had a guitar synth I played for a little while in the 90s, and that might have been just because I heard a few other people play, and I thought it might be interesting to try it. And then I had some chorus for a while and reverb, that sort of the sound that Schofield and Mike Stern still has pretty much.
Yeah.
So, my sound kind of changed, and I found myself going back to a pretty pure sound. And Schofield, Bill Frisell, Pat Metheny have all done the same thing. Pat still plays his guitar synth occasionally, but his sound these days is very pure, just with a little bit of reverb through a great digital system that he travels with. Bill Frisell, too. I mean, he likes lots of effects, but very often he's playing with a very pure sound. The last few times I've heard John Schofield, he's just straight into a Fender amp and backline with no effects. So these days I'm just playing with a little reverb and stereo, and that's it. And what that does, I think we all maybe came to the same conclusion that followed this path, is that you really hear the sound of your hands on the instrument. You hear a touch. That's a little harder to distinguish if you're playing through a lot of effects.
Which in a way is I don't know, for me, the experience has always been, because when we're playing live, the amp is always so close. In a way, all those little hands noise, at first they kind of bothered you in a way. So like the effects is a way of camouflaging them.
That's true.
And then I guess as you get more mature, you realize it's part of the guitar.
I think that's right. I mean, a little bit of squeak. You hear that more on a nylon string, and I have some nylon strings. On some of my recordings, you hear the squeaks, although I try with recording strings to minimize that. I don't play nylon as much as I do steel string, but especially I'm in the studio where things are close mic'd, I try to really minimize those sounds because they're a little distracting. But you forgive those things because you said that's just part of the guitar, or you might hear a damper pedal on a piano, or you might hear a drummer grunting when he hits a cymbal. I mean, that's just part of human making music. So those to me are not huge distractions as long as it's not so predominant all the time that it becomes a distraction. But I try to minimize those sounds.
I'm going to jump again because like what you just said kind of made me think of something else that I noticed in your playing. It seems you have a very light right-hand touch. It seems.
Very.
At the same time, the way you accent notes is spotless.
Right. Well, thanks.
And how do you combine the two things? I mean, as in being able to, putting all the accent with your right hand, other picking your fingers, because I know you must have done a lot of work in order to get the volume of your pick or the attack of the pick and fingers.
That's right.
Consistent, and already that is all. It would be like a practice on its own. But even when you're just picking, I notice a very light touch, but at the same time, the attack is very, very, very crisp.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you do that?
I mean, I think everyone will tell you that your right hand just develops, unless a teacher tells you to play a particular way, your right hand develops in a very organic way. So in my case, I have a little Fender teardrop pick. It's always picking fingers. And it is, if you just heard the amount of attack that I play without the amp, it is very light. So I've tried to do exactly what you described, which is to be precise with a light touch. So I, usually have the amp up a little loud. So the amp is doing some of the work for me.
Right.
Acoustic guitar, I have to mic it very close because I have I've got a few things up on YouTube where I'm playing acoustic guitars, and everything's very close mic'd because I'm not a strummer. I don't have a heart attack. But for me, I found that's a comfortable way to play. Like if I'm playing electric, I always have pretty strong pickups, usually humbuckers with pretty high output on my steel strings, and an amp that has plenty of headroom, so I can't really turn it up. And the attack is very light with the right hand, and that works for me, And the balancing of the pick and fingers is another part of the equation that you just mentioned. So I've just tried to focus on making everything sound even. You shouldn't hear a difference between the fingers and the pick. I'm sometimes using my middle finger to play individual notes. So I'm occasionally, I've seen John Schofield do this too, where he uses middle finger. He's got the pick palmed, and he's just using his middle finger for that softer touch. So I'm occasionally using my middle finger just with an upstroke combined with the pick, and then the other fingers for chords. So it's a kind of an odd-looking right hand, but when I'm playing, I don't think about it at all. It's just working. But it took me 40 years of that kind of hybrid picking to develop to get it to the point where it is now.
Plus, like your language, your left-hand language,
right?
There is a lot of arpeggios going on, or at least like what you call wide intervals, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Which on the guitar, arpeggio are probably the most complicated thing to execute because you're changing strings all the time, and you seem to have developed like some kind of combination of, sometimes you're alternating, sometimes you're sweep picking, but I guess it's just you're not really thinking about it. It's just part of the language.
Yeah, I think basically you train your hands with enough muscle memory that those patterns then become the basis, hopefully, for pulling melodies out of the memorized patterns. So a chord shape or an arpeggio is a template for me on the neck, and then hopefully I'm using those memorized shapes and patterns to create melodies. And those melodies, just my notion of what a melody is, or the song itself, or what I'm hearing from somebody else in the group. So all this practicing allows us hopefully just to be in the moment in a way that doesn't involve thinking when we're playing. I try not to think at all when I'm actually playing. I think when I'm practicing, but if I'm thinking while I'm playing, I hear it and I don't like it. And, I have legs that I fall back on like everybody else, but I think if you're willing to slow down and leave a little space to allow the conversation to unfold with the other musicians, if you're playing in a group, then you can kind of get out of your own head a little bit and really try to create something, even if it's a small variation on the learned patterns. As an improviser, our goal is to improvise and create melodies. That's what all the practice is for, really.
But that's what astonished. That's why how I felt in love with your playing, because I find it. We discussed this before. I find it incredibly poetic. Because
thanks.
It's on the surface might not even come across as complicated. Although as a guitar player, I know how difficult what you're doing is. But the fact that you leave space, it feels like a painting, which actually brings us to your latest album, right? The Rain painting with Dan Dean, right?
Thanks. Well, space is a critical component. Jim Hall said this too, that space, I'm not quoting him exactly, but I know he was talking about being influenced by some of the great swinger tenor players. You and I have talked about this in earlier conversations. He loved Ben Webster and Coleman Hawkins. So do I. A little bit I've heard of both of them. And this notion of space to shape the phrases and to encourage a real conversation with the other musicians to unfold. So we're not locked into patterns. We're allowing input from the other musicians to help us shape our own sensibilities, our own melodies. The conversation and creating an environment to understand where those conversations are possible. Space is a critical component in that, allowing that to happen.
Just going back 1 second to a technical thing, do you have out of curiosity, it's personal curiosity, right? Do you have some favorite humbuckers that you like?
Yeah, I've been for many years. I've been using the DiMarzio Andy Timmons, actually.
Right.
I got lucky. I was looking for a pickup for my little travel guitar, because the one that came with it, I wasn't happy with. It was a clean sound, but it wasn't working so well. And a friend said, you just call up DiMarzio. They make jazz pickups too. And I got really lucky because I called and they connected me with the tech, who I'm still in touch with occasionally, named Steve Blucher. Very nice man, who designed pickups for Jim Hall and Kenny Burrell and my other folks. And 2 days before, a friend of mine named Jim Soloway, who had built a guitar for me, Canadian luthier, had mentioned my name to Steve 2 days before. So Steve knew who I was. And he said, oh, sure, I'll send you some pickups. So he sent me a few, and the one I liked was this. Andy Timmons is a very good blues fusion player, I think.
Yes.
So they designed a very high output Andy Timmons model for him. And that's what I've been using in a number of guitars that I've had over the years. But I also like some of the Kent Armstrong pickups, some of the Seymour Duncan pickups. I have a Joe Barden pickup on one guitar. I've used Bartolini pickups over the years. So all those pickups I like. And they're all kind of different. And I think, different pickups sound different in different instruments, obviously. But typically, good to fairly high output clean is sort of what I'm going for.
What about strings? You have heavy gauge?
Yeah, I've got very light gauge, actually. A friend of mine named Steve Kirby, who's a good Boston guitar player. About 15 years ago, we were doing a workshop together at Berkeley in Boston. And he said, try this guitar. And he had these strings on it that were so light, but they didn't sound light or kind of flimsy. They sounded good. And I said, what are these strings? And he said, these are Tomastic KF-110 Precisions. And they build these as to be used on a classical guitar. Why anyone would use very light flat ones on a classical guitar, I have no idea. But they're 10 to 38.
Right.
Usual jazz gauge. Oh, so I've got that on a number of my steel strings. On the nylon strings, I have others. On my baritone and my baritone fretless, I've got heavier strings, like usually 12 to 52, kind of light jazz gauge. But these really light flat one strings I've been using for years on my main travel guitar that has the graphite neck, the solo edge. So I've got an Andy Timmons, that particular guitar, which you can see on YouTube. I have these little headless ones that I've been using on the airplane for years for my friend Roscoe Wright. And he's not making that design anymore, but he made it for about 20 years with these collapsible. It's a little like the Yamaha silent guitar with these plastic tubes that come off that give you the shape of the body. And that guitar is a little maple body and a solid graphite neck built by another company, Moses Graphite. They had a collaboration for a while, Graphite Neck, Steve Mosier. And then the pickup setup is the Andy Timmons DiMarzio humbucker in the neck position, and then an RMC, a Richard McClish piezo. So a little bit of piezo, high output humbucker, and these very light flat wound strings. Not the usual jazz setup at all.
Right.
But it works. For me, it works. I can get a good clean sound. If I'm flying and I have to borrow amps from friends, I take a little digital hardwire reverb. And if I'm lucky, I can get 2 amps. But even with the one, if I go straight in with my reverb pedal, if it's got a clean sound, it's fine. I can always make it work.
which leads me neatly to another aspect of your career, which is fascinating and probably like very interesting for hopefully the people that will watch this, because you're not only a fantastic artist. We're going to talk about your albums and your career as a writer, but also like you embody to me the poster child of the working musician. So, like for example, what you were discussing just now about the guitar being easy to travel because you're your own manager, you're your own agent, and you've been organizing your own gigs for 30, 40 years, as far as I know. Yeah. And yet you've been touring, not just the U.S. You've been to Europe several times. I mean, like
dozens of times, Francesco.
Exactly. Like you're not somebody that stands still very much, but managed to accommodate a career without the setup that more famous people might have, like So you book your own gigs, you travel to your own gigs. I know because we were talking about this. Sometimes in the US you get in a car and you just drive.
It's very, very grassroots level touring, Francesco. So what it is, no manager, no agent, putting out records on friends' labels essentially. And really, it's not booking. I should give my friends credit because it's not really, for the most part, it's not me booking the gigs on the road. It's my friends booking the gigs for me that I like to play with, hopefully that like to play with me. I'm generally staying with the friends that are booking the gigs, so very little in the way of hotel expenses. It's very grassroots. So I don't make demands on my friends by saying I need a plane ticket or I need travel expenses. I just say, hey, if we can work a gig together, I'll get myself there. Don't worry about me. And if if you're comfortable, or if you have a friend who's maybe comfortable having me grab a bed or a couch, great. If not, of course, I can pay for a hotel if I need to. But generally speaking, obviously everything changed with the pandemic. But prior to that, I was traveling between 7 and 9 months of the year, all with a network of friends, essentially. So I agree to go someplace with 1 or 2 gigs, and then I talk to another 30 people that are all within 1,000 miles of where I'm going.
Right.
And if I'm lucky, another 20 of them say yes, and I'm going to make some money. So it's very grassroots. It's a salesman's mentality. You've got to be willing to do the follow-up. You don't want to pester your friends, and everybody's busy with their own lives. So it's a bit tricky. You want to make sure that you're staying in contact and trying to make things happen, but you don't want to bother people or give them the impression that you're pressuring them to produce the work for you. So I try to be respectful. And, a lot of these friendships have turned into long, ongoing friendships that have gone on now for many, many years in some cases. Sometimes it's just one gig with somebody. Other times it's ongoing friendships. But it's just a matter of understanding what people are comfortable providing for you and then doing it in a way that doesn't feel like you're creating any pressure or anything that's uncomfortable for them.
But they say, I think like it's an English expression, like standing on the shoulders of somebody else. In a way, like if a young guitar player is seeing this, somebody in their 20s or somebody starting out professionally, in a way you demonstrated with your career the fact that you can even tour internationally and not being, let's put it that way, let's not being Palmettini at the same time. Yeah. There is this middle ground where it's still possible to do it, not just at local level. Because I know that you know what I mean. Like you demonstrated to everybody else. Because I don't know many people who manage to do that. I know you.
A few people do. I mean, I think basically you have to have a salesman's mentality, which means being willing to do the follow-up, be comfortable, and accept the fact that there will be some rejections and some cancellations and things that won't happen. And that's just the reality of trying to make a living. But basically, everybody can have the experience to do a little bit of touring if you're willing to go someplace and you know somebody who lives somewhere else and you like to play together. Even if you're losing money, I've gone on some trips where I broke even or lost money because I wanted to go to that place and try to establish some connections. If you go to a place, you'll learn more about opportunities there than if you don't go. So that's my mantra is, if you want me to come and let's play and teach some music together, I'm coming.
But one thing I remember in one of our previous conversations is like basically, let's say, I know you're based in Portland. I'm just making an example, but say if you have a gig in Los Angeles, once you establish the first gig, you might start trying to book something on the way or something satellite to that or
exactly. Yeah. So if I know that I've got one gig in LA, that one gig is not going to cover my expenses. And typically these days, a gig anywhere, if you're not famous, is local money. So then I have to try to get hopefully a couple of workshops. So bear in mind, I've been going up and down the West Coast since the late 1970s. So I've got lots of friends all over California. That's one of my little circuits down to California. Occasionally over another 7 hours east to Phoenix and Tucson. I can tell you within 20 minutes the drive time anywhere on the West Coast. Anywhere. You know, I know my way around out here. I started traveling with David Friesen out here in the 70s. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's ever easy. There's still a lot of work to set up these little gigs. So it might be, if I'm lucky, if I'm in a given city, maybe I have 3 or 4 or 5 things. I haven't been in Los Angeles as many times lately, more the Bay Area. I seem like I have a little more to do there. Things are changing. A lot of my friends who were teaching for many years that were good contacts are retiring. So then I have to try to build a new relationship with somebody at that school if I want to go back to do a workshop. So that part of my equation is changing a little now. I actually love connecting with good younger players and teachers. I feel their energy and their enthusiasm, and this helps me, you know. So I think there's a pretty good chance I could be, assuming that things get back to some kind of normal with some international travel and more normal travel, that I can do I'd like to do another 10 years of hitting it pretty hard.
Yeah, I don't see not only why not. I'm pretty sure. You know, you have a level of dedication, which I think we can all learn from. Yeah. And if there was not enough,
you know, the music feeds that dedication. Part of it's taking care of yourself, but part of it is, I think, understanding the fact that you can do good work all through your 70s. In some cases, some people all through their 80s. So some of that is good genes, some of that is maintenance, some of it is luck. But the music, you know, gives you that incentive to continue because you hope you have something to share of value, and you get this wonderful feeling of sort of enjoyment and fulfillment by producing something that you love that hopefully somebody else loves too.
Right. Let's quickly go back to John Stowell, the recording artist.
Sure.
If somebody, you know, just discovers you now, it's not going to be like that. But let's imagine if you had to suggest, say, 3 albums for them to start from, and say, okay, start from these ones.
Okay. Well, my earliest ones, you know, they sound early to me. I don't really exactly sound like that, but my first record gives you a glimpse of what I sounded like in my 20s. And my writing at that point was pretty rudimentary, I think. But I think the guys all played great on it. That project just dropped into my lap, the one you mentioned, Golden Delicious, because I've been recording with David Friesen. And a man named Irv Kratka had a company called Music Minus One, which was the precursor to Jamie Aebersold, where you could buy an LP that had a rhythm section you could play along. And he was a jazz fan. So he thought he would initially he started licensing European records from Steeplechase to be licensed in the States. And he thought he'd create his own label. So he created Inner City. And, you know, the money to fund that came from Music Minus One. So he was looking for people to sign. And David Friesen, my friend, who at that point was a new friend, I'd met him in 76, he auditioned for and then got a gig with Ted Kurson, the trumpet player who played with Mingus and others. So Ted Kurson put together a sextet. David was in that group. So Irv liked David and offered David a contract. So I was on David's first record. That was Steve Gadney and Paul McCandless. It's kind of an interesting band. So the next year at that point I was living in Oregon. I had left New York. I still had my place in New York that I was subletting, but I was moving back and forth with David and we were starting to play together. And so I was going to go back to New York the following summer to record another record with David. And I knew that material at that point. We'd been playing for a couple of years together. And I bumped into Irv on the street in New York. And I said, "Oh, nice to see you again. I'm looking forward to recording with David." And he said, "Oh, you want to do a record too?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do a record." I had no group, no material. In New York, I can find some people to play with. Because, you know, at that point, I also knew some people in New York because I'd lived there for a little while. So Jim McNeely, I knew. We'd done a few gigs together. Mike Richmond, I knew. So that was piano and bass. And Mike knew Billy Hart. Asked Billy. Billy said yes. Billy, at that point, had already played with McCoy, Herbie Hancock, Stan Getz, many others. The original trumpet player I wanted to get was unavailable, and he recommended Claudio Roditi, great Brazilian trumpet player who just passed away about a year ago, wonderful player. And Claudio was from Brazil, so he knew Dalmo Ramau, who had worked with Weather Reports, and that was the band. So we had a couple of rehearsals, and, you know, I was pretty young, pretty green, but playing well enough, I thought that I could pull it off. And Billy, who was probably the most experienced and most famous guy, came on. He was the humblest, sweetest guy. He said, "No, I'm not that quick, but I'll be fine." You know, I said, "Of course you will, Billy. You know, thank you for making it." So we did 2 rehearsals and I went in and did it. And for, you know, given the amount of time we had and there was never a working band, I think it came off okay for a first record. It's not bad.
This sounds really nice. Yeah.
So that's a little snapshot of me in my 20s. The records with David were primarily his material. But if you want a little sample of what I did for about 7 years with David Friesen, we did 2 with a couple of guests, Through the Listening Glass, and then another one called Other Mansions. And parts of those, I don't really sound anything like that to my ear now, and it's not material that I played with him for about 7 years playing these original tunes, and it was my introduction to the road, so I enjoyed my time with him. But I don't really feel like that's really what my musical identity is really about now. It doesn't really inform my musical identity now. But a little snapshot of me playing for 7 years from about 77 to 83. Either one of those records would give you a little sample. There are a couple of my tunes on those records that make it closer to what my musical identity was. Although David, gave me some important lessons. Intensity on the bandstand, learning how to conduct myself on the road, getting the energy and the stamina to do a very long drive and get out of the car and be able to deliver with a clinic or a workshop. So all that I learned from David, and I'm grateful for that. And then I really had a long break after I was recording with David before I got recording it. I just couldn't find anybody to record with. And then I started meeting friends who had small labels in the early 90s. So then I started doing CDs in the early 90s. And probably the longest relationship that's still ongoing started about 2000 with a label called Origin Records out of Seattle. And that's run by 2 drummers who started initially just doing covers for friends, and then they thought they'd create the label, and now they're 20 years into this label, and they have over 650 records in the catalog. Yeah. And I've got about 20 CDs with them, including the one you mentioned, Rain Painting, with Dan Dean, which is my most recent one. One of the drummers I play with, his name is John Bishop. We just played last night in Seattle, actually. And we have a group called Scenes. We've done 6 CDs. So sometimes that's a trio with bass and drums, and we occasionally have guests. So we're playing actually, while I'm in Seattle here, I'm playing 3 times with John. Last night was a little jam session with a trio with an old friend of ours, Bruce Ferris, who's a very good bassist. And then the group Scenes, which is the original group Scenes, with a tenor player named Rick Mandick and a bassist, Jeff Johnson.
Yeah, that's like 2001. It's one of my favorite albums. Right. That's why I'm saying it. Right.
There's an interesting story, which I think I told you in a prior conversation with you. The original tenor player in that group was a man named Rick Mandick, who had to stop playing the tenor because he blew out a hernia twice and had a musical pianist and a guitarist. But he solved that problem. So his first time back in the studio was with us about a year and a half ago for the Scenes CD that just came out called Trapeze. That came out about 3 months ago. And we're playing again with the 4 of us. We're actually playing on Saturday, doing a little streaming gig. I'll send you the link.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yes.
But Rick is playing better than ever. And it's just great to be playing with him again. So we did that recording like a year and a half ago, give or take. It was in September of 2019. So almost 2 years ago now. And Rick's playing better than ever. So we've done a couple of gigs together. And I think we'll try to maybe do another recording and some other work together. So that group started 20 years ago, and we've done things on and off since then. But I've done a couple of solo recordings for the Origin label. I had a quartet that I played with for a while that may not happen anymore, but we'll find some variation on that with Bay Area guys, a man named Mike Silver on tenor, Jason Lewis and John Shiflett. John unfortunately passed away, great bassist. So we did 3 recordings down there in the Bay Area. I've done 2 with a Swedish guitar player, Ulf Bandgren, 1 with the group, 1 in duo, 2 with Dave Liebman as duo, 1 with Dave Liebman and Don Thompson. They're singing in that label. I've got about 20 on that.
I mean, for those that are going to be watching this, I mean, most of these the album you mentioned, they're on Spotify. Most of them.
Yeah.
The few which are not, actually, I found them on YouTube.
Right.
So
Europe with small labels. I did one with Bebo Feta actually in Milano about 20 years ago. The artist label. Bebo's a great guitar player. We're still in touch occasionally. Wonderful player.
Yeah, I noticed something else about you, a lot of work with other guitar players.
Yeah, I probably got 7 or 8. You mentioned the one, Listen to This with Frank Hauenschild that we did in Germany. I did another one in Germany with Uwe Klopinski, maybe 20 years ago. So, they're all different, but and basically, if someone wants to record, I've recorded with a number of friends in Argentina, down there for small labels. A couple with Juan P. Juarez, those are all dual guitar ones. Some with Julio Gotia and his brothers. We did a nice quartet one. So I've done probably 4 or 5 in Argentina. I didn't record when I was in Asia, but I might do that in the future. But I've got probably lots of different projects in Europe, little ones, and they're all fun. And they all, none of them really make you much, if any, money. I probably made the most royalties from Origin because that's the largest body of work I have with any one label. But they're all fun to do, and this sort of helps you build your relationships and build repertoire. So I enjoy doing that.
But it's I guess give you also the opportunity for some original writing of yours. That's my guess. because of the way your career shaped, you must have come across and played with hundreds, if not thousands of people, right, on the bandstand.
Certainly hundreds over the years, sure.
Is there anything that you're particularly looking for in another musician, or if you want to say the opposite way, is like, what's your role within it? How do you set yourself up? Because I guess, as you said, most of these dates are like 1 rehearsal, 2 rehearsals, or more rehearsals.
Yeah, no, in some cases, though, you've had this experience too, Francesco. If you played with somebody a few times, then there's some chemistry and some musical rapport. So even if you don't see them again for a couple of years, it's really like bumping into an old friend on the street. When you play again, you remember. In some cases, it's gratifying because maybe you both made a little progress individually before you meet again, and then you realize, oh, our conversation sounds better now.
Right.
Because we've developed individually as musicians, we can bring more to our conversation when we were meeting again. So, things I look for in other musicians: some shared musical aesthetics. So, the use of space, obviously, how they approach melody, how they respond to what I'm giving them as an accompanist if I'm playing behind them. How do they approach having musical dialogue? In some cases, folks really just want you kind of to accompany them. There's not the level of interaction that I personally enjoy, but it can be an interesting challenge if you're playing with musicians who you realize are fairly different from you in terms of their aesthetics, what they like. Then the challenge is to find some common ground, and I always will. I'll always make it work. I've never had to say, sorry, I can't do the rest of the gig with you, or I'm having a terrible time.
Yeah. But
I always find to make it work. So ideally, it's great when you meet somebody new and you realize right away, oh, this is going to be easy and fun. We have a really great chemistry after one song. I can tell this will be fun and easy. And other times I'll say, well, this is a little more challenging. I have to look for some common ground, and I'll find it. So that might mean modifying my playing slightly to serve that particular conversation. That's the challenge I like. So first, I never get, unless someone has a huge ego and is just a little bit more challenging to play with, I'll always try to accommodate, and I can always make it work. And that's the challenge I like. That's part of freelancing. If you can't rise to that challenge, you shouldn't do that. You should maybe find one group of musicians and maybe not travel, or just be very selective about who you play with. I sort of embrace, the notion of going into a situation cold, and ideally maybe now with the internet, you can see what people sound like on YouTube and get a sense of how they sound before you meet them. In many cases. But I take that challenge seriously, and I enjoy it. I mean, I'm in a new situation. First of all, I want to make everyone feel friendly and relaxed so they can play their best and not come off with any kind of attitude, even if I'm the leader of the band. Just come in and right away establish a vibe that feels comfortable and relaxed for everybody. Play material that is realistic, and I want to play songs that are very hard that I know well, given the fact that maybe the other folks don't know them. I'll send some tunes in advance, and then I'll say, tell me what you'd like to play. We can play some things we know. We can play some of my book if you like, but we don't have to. Right away, I try to make everyone feel comfortable.
But that's the thing I remember about something that you mentioned before when we were talking, is this attitude you have, like making other people feel comfortable. Yeah. And I think once you combine this kind of attitude with what you said about establishing connection, not pressurizing people, I mean, everything, because, before getting to know you, as you know, I've done my little research. So, of course, I was browsing forums and these other people talking about you. And the common thread is, beside you being a fantastic guitar player, is how much of a nice guy to be with you are. And I think, independently from, let's have a coffee, sorry, I'm Italian, so, we think in terms of expressions, right?
Yeah.
But I'm sure these are also carterial threads which help a career, to have 20, 30, 40 years of career as opposed to trying to impose, your own will at all times, no matter, if this makes other people feel uncomfortable. I think it's important, right?
I think basically music is a reflection of your personality. So that's sort of the way I try to go through life, basically, just to have every encounter to be at least pleasant and just to make anyone feel comfortable, even if it's just at the gas station or the supermarket. How's your day going? How are you doing? Nice to see you again. Whatever it is. That little exchange can be nothing, or it can be a 30-second exchange that has some humanity,
Right.
And even if I'm talking to someone on the phone, I'll say, how's your day going? And that immediately changes the conversation, even if I'm just trying to get some credit card information. So,
right. True. Absolutely true. You mentioned YouTube And of course, like, we should mention the fact that you have a fantastic channel, which actually you didn't start long ago and is growing,
Yeah, I mean, and it helps me do the postings, and you really don't make any money on YouTube, I think, until you get up to maybe, I don't know, 10, 20,000 subscribers. I'm nowhere near that.
Well, hopefully this will help a little bit. But
yeah, hopefully. I mean, now I'm up to maybe, 14 or 1,500 subscribers, but I'm posting every week. I'm also on the Truefire YouTube channel.
of course,
Links, and they have 450,000 subscribers. So I think I'm getting a little revenue from them in my monthly royalty checks.
If I can suggest something to again somebody watching this in the future, on your YouTube channel, there is something that you actually stopped doing, and I'm sorry that you stopped because I loved it, and I still love it. Like the breakdown, yes,
I mean,
the harmonic breakdown.
As many views. I mean, I like doing it, but they don't seem to get as many views. But
probably if you have 200, it's just me. It's me watching it 20 times.
That's okay. I appreciate that.
Those are incredible lessons.
Oh, thanks.
They are
just showing you how I move through some simple voicings and chord melody ideas and so forth.
I know, those are amazing. Like,
that's right. I'll do another one just for you then.
I'm not kidding when I say probably I'll watch at least one every day.
Hey, I appreciate that. If you learned a few voicings or something useful, I'm happy.
It's in a way fascinates me just to see you talking about it, because it kind of gives me an insight into the process, like of arranging or how you think chords. I mean, your understanding of harmony is quite deep, and you mentioned the Truefire courses, and you have like, I don't remember, probably 2 or 3. Actually, yeah, you did on the Truefire, and then I see something, I can't remember if it's DC.
Yeah, I've got things with DC Music, Truefire, Mike's masterclasses.
And, which leads me neatly to John Stowell, the educator. I mean, we talked about the artist, we talked about, the working musician, and then there is the educator, because, you've been doing these teaching gigs also for a while. Yes. But one thing I noticed is not only like, you make complicated things sound simple. One.
But I think that maybe in your own teaching also, we can break harmony down into small enough components that it is really something that is teachable and learnable. So if I say, here's a simple arpeggio, now let's layer a melodic minor arpeggio on top of this in another key to correspond to a mode, and let's go back and forth between the two sounds. After really a couple of minutes, or even 1 minute, the student starts to recognize how the tensions can interact with the basic consonant sounds, and then how you use that in the context of the solo. It is all teachable.
I think, like, as a teacher, you need a couple of qualities. One surely is, the knowledge, of course, that's to be there. In your case, it's augmented by professional experience, which I think as a teacher is equally important. It's not that I don't trust a teacher who's only a teacher, but I think that somebody who's also a musician, has been through the motion of understanding the problematics of the guitar and then explaining it. But also, like, you can articulate. The other aspect is the ability to articulate the concept. Mm-hmm. And you do that incredibly well. I mean, like, if somebody's watching this, your lesson on melodic minors, the 4 melodic minors, alpha, 3 tone down. Oh, it's a little jewel.
Right. I got that from my teacher, Link Chamberlain, in the early 70s. And the reason I like his approach, I mean, I'm just giving you the modes of the melodic minor, but the way he explained it was as keys. And the reason he did that was to allow us to then use melodic minor chords as dominant chords, as major chords, as minor chords in other keys. So I'm really not giving you new information. It's just a slightly different approach. So I do the same
with the pentatonics.
Well. Great. Yeah.
I do the pentatonics, but I shift them. Like, I think of it as a 3 up, or
Yeah. So if we know that a B minor pentatonic also gives you a nice C Lydian, or that a C sharp melodic minor gives you a nice C7, we're just combining sounds essentially. And then part of that is the mechanics of working out how to connect fingerings on the neck, and then part of it is recognizing what a triad or a melodic minor or a pentatonic gives you when we superimpose it in another key over chord quality. And by slowly combining sounds, you start to recognize how tensions are interacting with the consonant sounds, and then putting that into a context of some kind of a melodic vocabulary. So that's a lifetime of refinement. But imparting the basic information and explaining it clearly is not that difficult. And part of our job is then to make sure
I like that you say it's not that difficult. But then, as I said, like you do it beautifully, and YouTube is full of. I don't want to criticize anybody, but it's full of stuff which. Okay. You know,
the other thing, everyone finds teachers that resonate with them. To me, some people might watch me and say this is much too abstract or too complicated. That's fine. I'm not trying to reach everybody. But what I like doing is, as you said, breaking down what feels like a complex language into these small components so that it becomes easy to absorb and assimilate when we break harmony down into small pieces.
Well, for those that don't know, like, say, for example, your modern jazz progression title with Truefire, like, you talk about the minor blues and the major and the blues, and you usually go towards layer of okay, I'm making harmonically more sophisticated. Now level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6. Yeah, that's right. And it's a great approach. Again, it teaches me some. Sorry, go ahead.
And part of it also, in terms of what sound you're using, is a reflection of who you're playing with. And there's some very good players who don't play a lot of complex harmony filled with tensions. They prefer to play more inside, and they're beautiful players. So, or someone is capable, like Jim Hall, of doing both. Where he'll play something that's so simple and bluesy, and then suddenly he's playing something that is clearly full of tension and more complex harmony. Jim studied classical music as a kid in Cleveland, so he absolutely knew more complex harmony, and would use that. That's sometimes also reflected in his playing and composing. But other times he'd play just a simple, beautiful melody that was very diatonic and fit perfectly.
One thing about Jamal, that attracts me very often, is the fact that it seems to have always a direction, and he seems to know where he's gonna go, and he just feels there, and then he gets there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very compositional. It's very compositional. His improvisation have real compositional intentions, motivic, so the ideas are connected together structurally, rhythmically, or harmonically. Space is used in a very creative way to shape the phrases, and also could have added to that notion of motifs throughout the solo. He's very often very mindful of the context of the tune in his solo. So, he had licks like everybody else, but you really hear very often when he's playing, or most of the time when he's playing, I think, someone really trying to be in the moment as an improviser.
Just one last thing about your guitar playing, because of course your guitar playing, it comes across, no matter what, some people might like it, some people might not, but nobody can argue with the fact that it's very personal and it's very unique. You have a very unique voice when it comes to guitar.
Yeah, I think it is original, and I think everybody who is original will tell you the same thing. There's no way to plan what an original voice will be, because maybe no one has exactly done that yet. So I think basically, if in my case, I certainly love all the great guitar players, and I've listened to all of them, but I didn't feel I wanted to copy any of them. So then I said, okay, I have to find, and Link Chamberlain encouraged me in this way. Then I had somehow to create my own vocabulary. So some of that was also listening to piano players for voicing. Some of that was listening to horn players for space. Maybe some of I've listened to classical music for years, although I've never really studied scores or done anything with it, but maybe some of that has sort of leaked into my consciousness somehow. Someone said some of my writing reminds them of Leo Brouwer. I've just heard a little bit of Brouwer, but, maybe some of his chords somehow came into my sphere of listening, and somehow that's kind of worked its way into my soloing. I have no idea. But some people have said they've heard little bits and pieces of what sound like classical composition in some of my little songs, which are certainly not at the level of a great classical composer. They're little short songs. But, listening and being sort of aware of different other influences that are not strictly jazz or other instrumentalists besides guitar players, maybe all those things have contributed a little bit to my notion of wanting to try to find my own way through all this somehow. And I think most other people will tell you the same thing who have original voices. It's not something they planned. It's just something that evolves organically. Some guys will say, you must transcribe. Other people will say, I didn't transcribe. Some of the original voices of my generation on the guitar, like Schofield, Bill Frisell, I don't think they transcribed. John Abercrombie, I don't think transcribed. Other people, Pat Metheny transcribed a lot. He has an original voice too. So I'm not sure that transcribing versus not transcribing, I think they both have merits, certainly. If you do transcribe, I think that should be sort of an intermediate step in the process to discovering your own voice. But it's sort of
analysis, like analyzing.
Yeah, analysis,
certainly. Rather than copying, just to understand somebody else's language.
Exactly, that's right. But I think the goal is to ultimately have a sound that is personal if you can find it. Now, some people are so in love with someone else that they decide they want to really try to sound as close to that person as possible. And that's, that still takes a lot of skill and dedication and practice.
Absolutely.
But the most that someone will say about your playing then is, well, that's a pretty good copy,
Right.
And necessarily a bad thing. Some guys have very perfectly good careers as very competent jazz players who decide to play in a particular style or sound a lot like somebody else. And I wouldn't argue with that if you're in love with that person's style and you really want to try to create something that feels like a good copy. If that's your goal, then that's really okay. That certainly still takes a lot of time and dedication and work. I never wanted to do that, though. I just wanted to somehow find my own voice, and as a result, it took me a while to build vocabulary to be able to function in the jazz setting with this, this fairly complex language that we have to try to master to try to find my own variation on that complex language. It's taken me quite a while, and I'm still trying to refine it and make it better. Absolutely.
Just have a couple more questions for you, then I'll let you go. And thank you so much for your time. Right? One that was suggested by a good friend of mine called Rich Perks. He's a teacher at university here, and he's into also experimental studies and microtones. He's a brain. He's a fantastic guitar player, but also a brain. Right?
Yeah.
And he was curious about you playing fretless. What is it that you like about playing fretless, and also how does fretless eventually allows you to express yourself differently compared to, say, vinyl string or...
So fretless for me was really just an experiment. I had an older guitar that a friend of mine named Bobby Warren built for me that I wasn't playing much, but I liked the guitar. It started out as a Warmoth body that he then built a neck for, and he pulled the top off and hollowed it out a little bit, added a new cedar top. So this guitar has been through about 5 different iterations. But I've had it since the 80s, so I knew I wouldn't sell it, and he made a beautiful neck for it. But I wasn't playing it much. So I thought, how can I reinvent this guitar again? I tried it for a while with baritone tuning. It worked pretty well. Not quite full-on baritone tuning. I think I was going C to C as opposed to B to B. But I was having fun with it and using it some, but I wasn't playing it much. And I thought, fretless guitar could be interesting. So I had some friends at a shop in Portland, where I live. Bobby lives up in the San Juan Islands, beautiful group of islands up off the Washington coast, but pretty far away. So I used to go up there pretty often, but I haven't gone lately. So just to make a drive up to have him modify the guitar and then come up and get it again would have been a bit of a trip. It's 4 or 5 hours each way with a ferry boat ride and so forth. So I just took it to a shop in Portland where I live and said, guys, let's take the frets out and please put in plastic markers so I can see, to play it in tune, you essentially put your finger on where the fret used to be. I'm amazed that people do without the markers. I mean, the dots help a little. But I found if I could, I had no idea if I could play this after they made it. I thought if it doesn't work, I'll just have them put the frets back in. This is maybe 10 years ago now. So they gave it back to me, and the neck was now a smooth piece of ebony with these plastic inlays, but it's smooth. But I found by putting my finger right on the fret, it's impossible to play normal chords that I would like to play. So I'm limited pretty much to double stops with chords, which I found a few to do. And I thought I'll keep that baritone tuning. So I've got it C to C. And I did find kind of a language to play on the fretless. I do a little bit of microtonal in the sense that you can sort of slide up to or down from a note in a way that you can't do with frets. So I love playing notes that are kind of in between our normal 12 tones. So it is microtonal in that sense a little bit, but it's not something that I've really studied exhaustively. And I don't, it's a guitar that I would maybe play a few times on a recording or a couple of times over the course of the night if I'm driving. I don't take it on the airplane. So sometimes I'm a little rusty if I've been on a plane for a couple of months and I come back and take it out. It takes me a minute to find my way again. But I've had the guitar with this configuration now for long enough that I can play it. But I'm usually doing it just on standards, or I've got quite a number of things on YouTube where I'm playing it now. And it's, that's a Bartolini acoustic pickup. It's a real kind of a jerry-rigged, funny guitar, but I like it. It's got a voice.
Right. Last question. So, again, 40, 50 years of career so far, but I'm sure, like every musician, you keep evolving.
My playing's definitely changing, like yours is, I'm sure.
So, what is John Stowell going next?
You don't really know where. I mean, this last project with Dan Dean, as I mentioned, you mentioned it, kind enough to mention it earlier. I don't really work so often with singers, although I have done work with some great singers over the years. But I'd like to collaborate with Dan again. So maybe some things that are a little more arranged in the future for projects. That project took us over a year to do because he layered all these different voices and parts, and he spent hundreds of hours in his home studio to do it. But I think we're going to maybe do another project, and maybe we can figure out a way to do it live with some of the pre-recorded tracks. I'm not sure. I've got another friend, Dave Glenn, who's a very good trombonist, and we have a duo project where he's going to write some string parts. He's got some of them written now for some original tunes of ours, so that'll be out maybe in 2022. So maybe things are a little more arranged. I've got a few big band charts now that some friends have done for me with some of my tunes. So I don't know if I'll do a big band album, but it's possible. I don't know. So, I'm just always sort of looking for things without knowing exactly what will be happening next. That doesn't bother me. I'm always sort of looking for new collaborations. There's some of these virtual duos I've been doing lately. They've been fun. There's a great Brazilian bassist who lives in Sicilia, named Alfredo Pachao. And we've done one virtual duo that's up on YouTube. And I'd love to do more gigs and maybe an album with him. He's a wonderful musician. And his wife, Nadia, is a wonderful singer. She's Italian, but she sings perfectly in Portuguese. So, just kind of casting that out there, staying in contact with friends. I'd love it if we could collaborate on something in the future.
Yeah, and hopefully coming back to Europe once this pandemic thing.
Yeah, maybe later this year, but I would hope certainly by next year international travel will be back to some kind of a new normal. But, maybe this year. And if I'm nearby, I'd love to see you in London and hang out. That would be great fun.
Either in London or in Italy.
Certo. That would be great fun. So, we'll stay in touch about that for sure, and maybe a chance to collaborate with some people and play in the future together. I'd be happy to do it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so the idea is just to kind of reach out to friends and try to make things happen without worrying so much about exactly where it's all going.
Of course. Listen, it's been a wonderful pleasure. For
me.
As always, it is. You're a very kind person, a fantastic musician, but also a very kind man. Hope to speak to you soon again. And if you would like for this, I know you're on the road this week, so good luck with your gigs, and hope to speak to you soon enough.
Yeah, and I hope your gig, you have an upcoming gig too. I hope it goes well.
I have an upcoming gig. Yeah, in England, the lockdown clubs are reopening basically to the public on the 17th. They've been closed since November.
Right. Hope the gig goes well for you.
So, it's going to be a bit... As you mentioned, we kind of reinvented ourselves during this 1 year and a half with live streams, online teaching. We kind of had to do it in order to stay afloat. But it's nice, it's different when you play to an audience compared to when you play to a camera.
Yep, I agree. But I hope it goes well.
Within the confines of the pandemic, for us, it's been already nice to be able to at least play with other musicians. That was already like an achievement in a way. With the limitation of having to do with as in a streaming kind of experience. But at least we got to play with other people as opposed to just be at home and watch.
Exactly.
Kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we've all kind of reinvented ourselves, and I think some of that reinvention and internet collaboration we will carry on with that going forward, which is really okay. In that sense, it's sort of a blessing. But I think getting back to live performing is going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. And again, a true pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're willing to take the time with me, and if you like what the interview looks like or want to edit some of it, feel free to post, of course.